You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Okay, so the jury just heard a Trump-Cohen tape in which Cohen tells Trump one particular bombshell line. So we're going to discuss that, but first, just a reminder for those watching right now that Glenn and I will be doing daily comprehensive coverage of the entirety of Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York happening right now. So for those watching, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, Glenn, I want to play a quick clip of what the jury heard between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen.
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David. So that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes, and it's all the stuff because you never know where that company, you never know where he's going to be. Correct. So I'm all over that, and I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be.
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to. No.
So as you heard, he says the line, I need to open up a company for the transfer about our friend David. And of course, David refers to David Dennison, which is an alias that's used by Donald Trump. So can you talk about the implications of the jury hearing this tape for the first time?
Brian, they have to be just sort of bowled over with the directly and sharply incriminating evidence on audio tape about the two co-conspirators, Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, a.k.a. David Dennison, having to create a shell company, a sham corporation to run payments through, to hide, to bury, to secrete the damaging information Stormy Daniels had about Donald Trump. And of course, there's nothing nefarious about Michael Cohen and Donald Trump talking about how they have to give Donald an alias of David Dennison so nobody knows what's going on here. This is the kind of thing that reminds me of when I had cases with wiretap evidence. Brian, I have to tell you, when the jury was sitting in the box and they were looking at the defendant across the courtroom, and I just pressed play, and the jury heard the defendant say in a drug case, for example, yeah, look, I'm going to need 6 kilos by Friday. Are we good? You got me? That tends to be pretty devastating and incriminating evidence. And, what they got today in this undercover, this surreptitious audio recording made by Michael Cohen was no different than wiretap evidence in a drug conspiracy case. And, I have to believe at this point, the jurors are beginning to think to themselves, I wonder when the evidence in this case is going to wrap up so we can make our way back into that deliberation room and, start talking about whether Donald Trump is guilty as charged.
Can you talk about the impacts that just having a pseudonym, first and foremost, is going to have on people in the jury? Because like you said, it is not illegal to have an alias, but the fact that he kind of had to use it. Talk about the atmospheric impacts and what the jury is going to come up with as the result of that.
Yeah, if this was all on the up and up, Michael Cohen would have said, listen, we need to make this payment to Stormy Daniels so she doesn't reveal the information about you, Mr. Trump, as you've heard Michael
right.
Cohen refer to him before.
As he's been known to be referred to by.
Yeah. So I think that there's a phrase. It's a Latin phrase that we use in the law when something is so painfully obvious that the thing speaks for itself. The phrase is res ipsa loquitur. Literally, the thing speaks for itself. The incriminating nature of this conversation and Michael Cohen and Donald Trump giving Trump an alias of David Dennison to keep all of this under wraps, the thing kind of speaks for itself.
Now, prosecutors also got Stormy Daniels' lawyer, his name is Keith Davidson. They got him to admit that he and the National Enquirer editor believed that the catch-and-kill scheme likely impacted the 2016 election. Talk about the implications of that.
Yeah, there was a bit of testimony that was pretty breathtaking, and it actually undercuts one of the defense assertions, that they're trying to use to wiggle out of Trump's criminal responsibility for this. What Keith Davidson testified to is, that he was engaged in, this hush money payment and covering these things up. And then come election night or the next day when it looks like Donald Trump was going to win the election, Keith Davidson said, oh my God, what did we do? And the import of that is really twofold. One, they recognized the potentially dramatic damage they had done to the country by engaging in conduct that may have actually facilitated Donald Trump getting elected. But the other important evidentiary takeaway, and you need to sort of apply an inference to get there, is when he said, "Oh my God, what did we do?" It's clear that Keith Davidson and the others involved in this scheme knew that these hush money payments were being made to impact the election, not to try to conceal information from Melania or Donald Trump's family, because, they would not have woken up on election morning, the day after the election, realized Donald Trump won and said, "Oh my God, what did we do?" If this was all about Donald Trump not wanting Melania to learn about his dalliances.
Right. I mean, if it was about Melania not finding out, they would have been celebrating the fact that she continued not to know because it was successfully secreted. But this was very clearly about the election, and their comments on the day after the election are a direct testament to that.
Exactly. And all of this is sort of what I would call a pre-buttal. What do I mean by that? We haven't seen Michael Cohen testify yet. But the more witnesses and the more documents that sort of lay out the story in its entirety, it's much easier for the jury to accept as credible Michael Cohen's testimony when he says, "Look, this is what happened, A, B, C, D." And the jury has already had evidence that A, B, C, and D did in fact happen, just like the other witnesses testified, just like the documents prove. So, yes, Michael Cohen will be attacked, and he'll be attacked vigorously on cross-examination, as well he should be. That's our adversarial system. But this is kind of a pre-buttal, right? They're sort of building up his credibility before he even hits the stand.
Glenn, I have some good news for you, and that is that I owe you the buck, because I think our last bet was when I asked you what the likelihood of Donald Trump taking the stand would be, and you likened it to a snowball's chance in hell. Donald Trump just came out and basically said that he couldn't take the stand to testify because he's being gagged, and therefore silence won't be able to testify in the trial. What's your response to that?
My response to that is Donald Trump is a stone-cold liar all day, every day. Judge Merchan did not tell Donald Trump he can't testify. He said, "You can't make statements about the witnesses or the jurors or the court's family members." And Donald Trump steps right to the camera in what I call his hallway lies session at the end of each trial day and just spouts lies into the public square. I don't expect the prosecutors to do this, Brian, but they could actually present evidence to this jury that Donald Trump said, "I'm not allowed to testify because I'm being gagged." And then they could ask for a jury instruction from the judge or ask the judge to take judicial notice. That's when something is so obviously provable and it's beyond dispute, like a defendant can testify in his own criminal case, and have the judge inform the jury that in substance, Donald Trump is lying, and it conveys a consciousness of guilt. I don't expect the prosecutors will go down that road. But, Donald Trump is almost always his own worst enemy, and he's proven that over and over again during the course of this trial in any number of ways, including trying to micromanage his defense attorney's decisions, the tactical choices they're making. There was just some reporting in the New York Times saying that Donald Trump is venting behind the scenes because he is so furious with his attorneys because they're not following his instructions and because he's not going hard enough and aggressively enough after witnesses, the jurors, and the judge. It's typically not a defense attorney's job to go after jurors and the judge, but Donald Trump really is his own worst enemy, and he's sort of tying one hand behind the back of his defense attorneys, all of which will hurt him in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of shows that he believes that he's already lost this thing. And so now the whole case is just to win in the court of public opinion because he knows that there's no chance that he'll win otherwise. And so by virtue of attacking the witnesses, by virtue of attacking the judge, by virtue of attacking the jury, all of whom he's painted as these, runaway liberals, he's just making the case to his supporters that the whole thing is a hoax and that he's the victim and that the fix is in, basically.
Yeah, and none of it's going to work. It may make his supporters feel good in the moment. They may send him another $5 or $10 that they probably can't afford to send him. One of the real sins here is that he is hurting his supporters as much as he's hurting anybody, if not more. And, you wish you could convey that to them in a way they would understand because, it is probably as bad for his MAGA base if he gets reelected as it is for anybody else in this country. Let's face it. Look at how many of his MAGA supporters are serving time. they're cooling their heels either in the D.C. jail or in the Federal Bureau of Prisons because they followed Donald Trump's orders after they had been lied to about their vote being stolen and their election being rigged. They attacked the Capitol on his orders. They went to prison. He plays golf. You know, you wish that his own supporters, his own base, would wake up and realize that he's hurting them really more than he's hurting anybody else.
And those are just the 1,000 or so people. Think about the country more broadly. Think about who Donald Trump actually helped when he was in office. He had one major legislative accomplishment. That was a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. The vast majority of this country did not derive some major benefit from Donald Trump's tax cut. It was his rich buddies who funded his campaign. Besides that, look what else he's going to usher in by virtue of his Project 2025 being enacted. We're talking about women's pregnancies being monitored by states and Donald Trump giving the green light to that. I mean, just on issue after issue, none of this stuff is actually going to help these people who've just gotten kind of sucked into the cult of personality that is Trump. With that said, though, Glenn, isn't it kind of a tell that Donald Trump says that he can't testify because he's being gagged, and the only reason he's being gagged is to prevent him from impugning witnesses and members of the jury? And so it's kind of like a tell in the sense that if he does speak, he can't help but attack those people and kind of impugn the integrity of the trial more broadly?
Yeah, but let's face it, I think even he knows he can't testify because he would be, you know, figuratively speaking, disemboweled on cross-examination.
Yeah.
So he has to blame it on somebody else or something else, and it looks like, at least today, he chose to blame it on the judge's gag order, which I actually do think Judge Merchan may want to take up in court on the next trial day, because he may say, listen, I need to make sure you understand, Defendant Trump, you have an absolute constitutional right to take the stand and testify in your own defense. And I heard you say something very different yesterday after you left court. So let's clear this up. That will be an embarrassment. That will be Donald Trump and his lawyers having to basically concede, even if only tacitly, that he lied to the public when he said that he couldn't testify because of the gag order. And again, Donald Trump is nothing but bad tactical decisions. And, you know, the more you watch this trial play out, the more convinced I become that he is going to be convicted of, you know, perhaps all 34 felony charges for falsifying business records to basically try to steal the 2016 presidential election.
And let's finish off with this. I know that we have kind of these nebulous figures right now. I know the big witnesses that we're all waiting to hear from are Stormy Daniels, Karen McDougal, and Michael Cohen. Do we have any idea when these people are going to testify, or is the court not saying who's going to testify to try to prevent Donald Trump from attacking those people before they even come up to the stand?
Yeah, I think the prosecutors are giving relatively little advance notice to Trump and his defense team because they don't want to give him the opportunity to then lash out at these witnesses publicly, which of course would represent yet additional violations of the gag order. But I do think, you know, as soon as tomorrow, the next trial day, you're probably going to see one of the big ticket witnesses likely to testify. Now, whether it's Karen McDougal, who I think will testify before Stormy Daniels, let me just tell you as an aside, what the order of call, in other words, the order in which we present witnesses to a jury, is critically important. We don't generally do it chronologically. What we do is put our strongest witnesses up front, and we try to persuade the jury early on of the quality and the quantity of the evidence proving the defendant's guilt, and then you put the weaker witnesses farther down in the order of call once the jurors are already beginning to get a pretty clear picture of what Donald Trump did here. So I would think you'd see Karen McDougal, and then perhaps Stormy Daniels, and then perhaps Michael Cohen, with a smattering of other witnesses. We still have a potential blockbuster witness in Hope Hicks, one of Donald Trump's longtime confidants. Who knows what Hope Hicks might be able to bring to the evidentiary table about things Donald Trump confided in her about that might turn out to be really damning.
And of course, we'll be here to cover all of that. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along with the entirety of this trial, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.